When I found out 5 years ago that my sister was having an affair with my husband, my world fell apart. I left her heartbroken and betrayed and made the decision to change my life. I never expected to hear from them again. But then, out of the blue, my sister called and asked me what was making my blood freeze in my veins. When the phone rang, I was scared when I saw my sister's name on the display. Like everyone else, the day started with the usual routine of morning coffee and emails. I hadn't heard from her for 5 years. My finger hovered over the answer button, and a feeling of curiosity and fear swirled in my chest. Finally, I gave an answer and prepared myself for what was to come. The cause of the call, Jenna's voice trembled, almost unrecognizable. Before the words tumbled out in a rush, she stammered out a greeting. "Why should I help you? I need your help," she said, and it was obvious she was desperate. My heart ached. Memories of betrayal flashed through my mind. I asked. Unable to hide the bitterness, Jenna stopped, and her silence was heavy. She took a deep pause, as if trying to calm herself. She finally said, "It's about my child," and her voice broke. The words hit me in the stomach like a punch. My mind raced, straining to process what she had just said. I had no idea that she had a child, that I had either a niece or a nephew. I felt a mixture of confusion and anger rise up inside me. "Your child," I echoed, trying to keep my voice quiet. Jenna quickly told me that she had a young daughter and was no longer able to look after her. She didn't give any more details, but the sadness in her voice was clear. My anger merged with a wave of worry over an innocent child. I had no idea whether to believe Jenna or hang up the phone. Jenna spoke quickly and succinctly about her situation, her words barely meaningful through her sobs. "Can we please meet?" I listened, torn between disbelief and a growing sense of horror. She mentioned an illness, but I didn't understand the details. She pleaded in a brittle voice. Against my better judgment, I met up with Jenna. Despite our history and Jenna's betrayal, she was still my sister. Hanging up the phone, I had a sense of foreboding. We made an appointment for the following day at a small cafe we used to frequent. I was stunned for the rest of the day and kept having the feeling that my life was about to change again. I got to the cafe early the following day and was excited. I sipped my coffee with trembling hands. When she finally walked in, I barely recognized her. I looked at the door, hoping Jenna wouldn't show up to return to my carefully groomed, quiet life. She looked pale and fragile, a shadow of the sister I used to know. She sat across from me, her eyes filled with fear and hope. Jenna looked even worse. She said, "Thank you so much for coming." Her voice was barely higher than a whisper. I made no reply, but I waited for her explanation. Her eyes had gotten caught, and her hair was hanging sloppily around her thin face. She took a deep breath and began to tell me her tale. As Jenna described the past 5 years, her words went slowly at first, and then faster. She mentioned her father, but did not give his name. She told me about her illness and her struggles to cope on her own. The more she spoke, the more I realized how desperate her situation was. She reached into her bag and took out a picture. "This is Emily," she said, handing it to me shakily. "What do you want me to do?" I looked at the photo of a girl who had big eyes and a shy smile. Despite the anger and resentment I had towards my sister, my heart ached for her. I asked, my voice barely able to contain itself. Jenna was sad when she revealed that Emily's father was not in the picture. She didn't mention his name. "When he found out I was sick, he left," she whispered in a brittle voice. I could feel how heavy her words were, how lonely she must have felt. Emily's innocent face stared back at me, and although I was still angry, I felt a tinge of pity. When Jenna stopped, I asked her again what she wanted me to do. Despite her emotional state, I urged her to be clearer. "Yes, Jenna, you need to be aware. I said, keeping my voice calm. She wiped her eyes and took a deep breath. Finally, she said, "I want you to take care of Emily." She barely whispered more. The request hung in the air between us, harsh and unanticipated. Jenna struggled to respond, her fragile appearance lessening her struggle, and the tension between us remained evident. I wasn't sure I could help her and Emily. "I don't have anyone else," she said shakily. "Please, she deserves a better life than I have now." I could see her eyes full of despair, but my betrayal was still too fresh. Although Jenna's voice was weak, she eventually managed to carry on. But her discomfort was evident as she tried to express her needs. "But Emily remains innocent." "I know I hurt you," she said with trembling words. "She needs someone to care for her, someone to love her." She looked at me, tears streaming down her face. I remained silent, unsure how to react. Her trembling hands and fragile frame spoke volumes about her current situation. Not knowing how to respond to her request, I watched Jenna's attempts to explain and felt a mixture of pity and frustration. "You've put me in an unimaginable position," I said, my voice tinged with emotion. Jenna nodded, realizing what her request meant. "I know that," she whispered, "but I'm begging you, please help her." I took a deep breath and struggled to process everything. She stopped and looked down at her hands. As she continued her story, trying to gain my sympathy, Jenna's fragile appearance and soft voice betrayed the pain she was going through. "It was so hard," she murmured, undigested tears glistening in her eyes. "I never intended to burden you," she added quietly. My resolve was worn down by her words, coupled with her weakened state. I had no idea what to do next. "Yeah, I look pretty awful, don't I?" As I spoke about Jenna's poor condition, I gave her a soft laugh that emphasized the strained but intimate connection between us. She said with a smile. Her attempt at humor in such a bad moment touched my heart. Yet there was still a connection between us, a shared history that wasn't going to end easily, no matter how much I wanted it to. Her eyes, which used to be full of life, now looked exhausted and drained. Seeing my sister in such a weakened state made me feel sad, despite my initial harshness. "I would never have imagined this," she whispered in a trembling voice. Gradually, I realized the reality of her situation, and my anger gave way to a strong feeling of sadness for her situation. As Jenna took a deep breath and looked into my eyes, her unhappiness and the difficult reality of her illness became clearer. "I don't have much time," she said softly, her expression calm but sad. I found the weight of her words heavy, and I found it hard to hold my expression. The thought that I was going to lose her, even though I couldn't. To focus on her current state, I asked Jenna directly about her health. I put our emotional past behind me. "What's wrong, Jenna?" I asked in a stiff but gentle voice. She sighed and began to explain. Her words were slower and more urgent. "It's bad," she admitted, "worse than I realized." I listened intently to her, and with each word, the gravity of her situation became clearer. Her words were heavy and unhappy. Finally, Jenna said, "I'm really sick," which made it clear that her condition was more serious than I had initially thought. She continued, "It's not just a cold or the flu," she said, barely whispering. Her confession was hard for me, and I felt a lump in my throat. I realized that her problems were much more serious than I had imagined. She told me about her illness over the past year, including the visits to the doctor and the failed treatments, giving me a clearer understanding of her struggle. "It started with fatigue and pain," she explained. "Then the doctors found the tumors." As Jenna spoke about the countless visits to the doctor, her voice wavered as she recounted her hopes that were dashed with each failed treatment. I felt a wave of compassion as I listened to her and realized how arduous her journey was. Her words sent a shiver down my spine. As Jenna explained the difficult reality of her medical situation and made her despair clear, I realized just how serious Jenna's illness is. "The therapies didn't work," she said bluntly, "and it's too late for anything else now." I could see the fear and resignation in her eyes, and I realized how bad her situation actually was. The idea that she was going to be lost was overwhelming. Her detailed account of the failed treatments and ongoing suffering highlighted the severity of her condition. "The pain is constant," Jenna admitted, her voice cracking. "I've tried everything, but nothing helps." She looked at me, her eyes full of pain and hope. I couldn't deny the reality of her suffering, and I felt my heart ache for her. She needed help, and I served as her last resort. "I don't have much time," she said, her voice barely a whisper. When I realized how serious Jenna's illness was, I was amazed at the magnitude of her situation. The words rang in my mind, each one hitting me like a hammer. I struggled to find my expression, the weight of her confession pressing down on me. It was obvious that things had changed, and I was forced to decide what to do next. "Jenna, how much time do you have left?" I asked, barely able to keep my composure. When I asked Jenna how much time she had left, my voice faltered as I tried to imagine the gravity of her situation. She looked down at the floor and took her eyes off me. "Not for a while," she whispered. I felt a wave of terror come over me, and the reality of her condition hit me harder than ever. I needed to know so that I could understand the extent of her situation. My fears were confirmed by Jenna's sad smile and her reply of 4 or 5 months max, which left me struggling with the impending loss. Her voice was soft, but full of sadness. "The doctors did whatever they could," she said softly. As I felt a lump in my throat, the words slowly sank in. 4 to 5 months. In that time, we still had time. The idea that she would be lost so soon was unbearable. I felt a mixture of emotions, sadness, anger, helplessness. As I took a deep breath and tried to process the reality of her limited time, the weight of Jenna's prognosis weighed heavily on me. Jenna looked at me, her eyes characterized by resigned acceptance. "I'm sorry," she said, grabbing my hand. I squeezed her hand gently, unable to find the right words. The silence between us was heavy with unspoken emotions. She looked at me with a mix of relief and discontent. As I asked Jenna again what she needed me to do, my tone softened, and it was clear to see my voice change from anger to readiness. "Jenna, tell me what you need," I said in a soft but firm voice. "I want you to take care of Emily," she said, her voice breaking out. I was aware that her request was a turning point for both of us. Jenna pleaded with me. "Emily needs someone to love her, someone she can trust." Jenna's request for support in the face of her terminal illness changed our dynamic, creating a new level of urgency and need. I felt a wave of emotions, fear, responsibility, sympathy. I knew I had to make a choice that would change both our lives forever. I said quietly, "I'll think about it." I knew there was still a lot to discuss, and Jenna asked me to adopt Emily. She expressed her despair about her daughter's uncertain future in foster care. "Please, you're the only other family." Tears were streaming down her face. "I can't bear the thought of her ending up with strangers." The seriousness of her request hit me hard. Taking in a child was no small matter, and Jenna's desperation exacerbated her plight. The thought of becoming a parent all at once daunted me greatly. I nodded slowly, stunned by the request and the consequences of taking on a child with no experience or connections. "Jenna, this is a big commitment," I said in a shaky voice. She nodded, realizing what her question meant. "I know it's a lot," she said softly, "but I trust you. Emily needs someone to like her and look after her." Jenna revealed that she had talked to Emily about me, making the request even more personal and heartbreaking. "She knows about you," Jenna said, smiling sadly. "I told her stories, showed her photos. She already senses that she knows you." Emily already had a picture of me in her head, which made my heart ache. It was obvious to what extent Jenna had hoped that. What if I'm not enough? That's what Emily needs most. I expressed my concerns about being childless and inexperienced, imagining the huge responsibility Jenna had placed on me. "I haven't raised a child," I admitted, my voice unsteady. Jenna grabbed me across the table. "You have a big heart," she said with conviction in her voice. "You can learn the rest." "Please, meet with her," Jenna begged, her eyes pleading with me to understand her. Jenna's request and her statement that Emily knew about me touched me deeply and made the request even more urgent and emotional. There was a desperation in her voice that was palpable. I realized that this decision would change all of our lives forever, which is why I felt a knot in my stomach. "Okay," I finally said in a soft voice. "I'll go out with her." Jenna asked me to reconsider her proposal. I agreed to meet her the following day to get to know Emily and discuss it further. "Please reconsider," she said with questioning eyes. I nodded, feeling the weight of her words. "I will," I replied in a firm voice. We agreed to meet at her place the following day. I was still oppressed by the enormity of what she was asking, but I knew I had to go through with it. Jenna and I stood awkwardly outside the cafe. Our pasts and the passage of time made the moment uncomfortable and tense. The silence between us was harsh, full of unspoken words and memorable flashbacks. Finally, she said, "Thank you for listening to me," and her voice was barely audible. I nodded, not knowing what to say. The years of pain and betrayal lingered, but there was also a small hope of reconciliation. The hug was awkward, tentative, but it spoke volumes. Even though I hesitated, I gave Jenna a quick hug and felt a tinge of emotion as tears welled up in her eyes when she said goodbye. "Watch it," I murmured, pulling back. Jenna smiled softly, tears glistening in her eyes. "I'll see you tomorrow," she replied, her voice full of gratitude. I turned back and left, the weight of our conversation still heavy on my shoulders. She stood and watched me walk away. Jenna's hesitant reaction to the hug and her emotional state made the situation even more impressive when I promised to meet her the following day. Her expression was a combination of relief and sadness. I assured her, "I'll be there," and made an effort to give her some comfort. Jenna nodded and smiled faintly. By the time I left, the emotional weight of our exchange had worn off. Walked out of the cafe with a combination of determination and concern about what steps I needed to take to support Jenna and her daughter. It was a huge decision I was about to make, and the responsibility weighed heavily on me. But there was also a sense of ambition, a determination to bring the right thing to Emily. When I got to my car, I took a deep breath and prepared myself for the challenges ahead. The drive took long enough for me to worry and think. The following day, I made my way to Jenna's new residence, feeling nervous and curious about the unfamiliar location. What about Emily? What would Jenna look like today? I clutched the steering wheel tightly, my heart pounding harder with every kilometre. The closer I got, the stronger my emotions became. How could we live in such close proximity without running into each other? When I reached the new address and prepared for it, I was surprised that I had never seen Jenna before. It was a strange, almost surreal feeling to be here after all these years. As I looked at the house where my sister and her daughter lived, I parked the car and let myself calm down for a moment. Every second felt like an eternity. As I rang the doorbell, deep breaths steadied my trembling hand, and anticipation made my heart race as I waited for the door to open. My mind was full of questions and worries. What if Emily didn't suffer me? What if Jenna had made a different decision? The sound of footsteps approaching the door made my mind reel, and I wrapped myself up for the moment. Emily, a little girl of no more than 5 years old, opened the door. Her innocent face brought a moment of unexpected warmth to the tense situation. "Hello," she said quietly, her wide, curious eyes fixed on me. For a moment, the tension dissipated and was replaced by a soft warmth. Emily, my niece, was standing right in front of me. I smiled, and I felt a sense of relief and love. As I prepared to enter Jenna's house and see my niece for the first time, I greeted Emily with nervousness and determination. "I'm your auntie." "Good afternoon, Emily," I said softly, leaning toward her. She looked at me curiously, a shy smile forming on her lips. Upon entering, I felt a sense of purpose. This was the beginning of something new and important. "Good afternoon, Emily. I'm your aunt," I said gently and smiled at her kindly. "Aunt?" Squatting down at Emily's eye level, I presented myself as her aunt and made an effort to connect with the little girl. She looked down at me with wide eyes, and her curiosity was obvious. She repeated, tilting her head back a little. I nodded, feeling a mix of excitement and hope. "Yes, I'm here to be with you and help your mother," I said. "Mommy, who is this?" Emily inquired, turning to Jen. As Jenna slowly emerged, her poorer condition was even more apparent than the day before when Emily asked who I was. Jenna's pale face and exhausted eyes met mine, and she made a slight smile. "That's your aunt," Jenna said in an exasperated voice. It broke my heart to see Jenna like this, and I realized I had to commit to both of them. She insisted on resting. Jenna welcomed me inside, but I insisted that she rest while I was with Emily. I also helped Jenna inside the house to get her out. "You need a break, Jenna," I said firmly. "I'll take care of everything." Jenna hesitated, but eventually nodded, showing her exhaustion. "Thank you so much," she whispered, settling down on the sofa. I turned to Emily, who was watching us with wide eyes. "Let's do something fun," I suggested. Emily followed me around and talked about her favorite toys and games, prepared my lunch, cleaned and did laundry, and made an effort to help Jenna both physically and, she said, "You're really good at this." She watched me as I folded the laundry. I smiled, feeling like I was accomplishing something. "Thank you so much, Emily. I just want to help," I said. I felt a growing bond with this little family throughout the day. Zrania come to terms with her illness. Every task I grappled with and every moment I spent with Emily had meaning. My efforts to care for Jenna and connect with Emily led to a new chapter in our strained relationship. The house was filled with Jenna's grateful smiles and Emily's giggles, creating a new sense of normalcy. I realized that Emily was just the beginning of something important and transformative for all of us that night as I tucked her into bed. "Good evening, Emily," I whispered to tuck her in. That night, I made dinner and put Emily to bed to create a sense of normalcy and routine in our messy lives. "Good night, my aunt," she replied, smiling sleepily. Closing her bedroom door, I felt a sense of stillness over the house. The day had been busy, but for all of us, it was the beginning of a new normal. Jenna and I sat on the sofa. She gave me a steaming cup of tea to thank me for helping her. I sipped the tea and felt its warmth growing inside me. "Thank you so much for all you've done today," she said softly, her eyes full of respect. "It's the least I can do," I replied as I met her gaze. For the first time in years, there was a sense of peace between us. The old wounds remained there, but they were less harsh. I realized that I had spent the entire day with Jenna, not focusing on past discomforts, but focusing on her current needs. "Today has been good," I said, breaking the silence. Jenna nodded and smiled a little around her lips. "Yeah, it was," she said. We had managed to create a sense of normalcy, and it was great progress. "I regret everything," she said in a trembling voice. Jenna's apology for her tardiness was an important moment as she acknowledged the injustice of the past and asked for forgiveness. I should have reached out my hand first. I looked at her, and I realized the sincerity in her eyes. I said, "I forgive you." And the words were painful and liberating in equal measure. That was a step towards healing for both of us. "We need to talk about what happened," I said in a strong voice. "Yes, we need to," she agreed. As I prepared to face the lingering pain from our shared past, our conversation turned to the importance of addressing past issues. Jenna nodded, realizing how significant this moment was. There was a lot that needed to be unpacked, but it was necessary in order to move forward. There were a lot of unspoken words in the air between us, waiting to be released. "Is that the man?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. When I asked Jenna directly if Emily's father was my ex-husband, she confirmed the connection with a slow nod. Jenna returned the look, guilt and pain on her face. Slowly, she nodded, and tears came to her eyes. Confirmation hit me hard, a mixture of anger and sadness swirling inside me. I took a deep breath and struggled to process the revelation. I tried to reach him, but he never answered. Jenna stated that my ex had left her as soon as he found out about the pregnancy, and that all attempts to get in touch with him had failed. When he found out, he just disappeared, she said in a shaky voice. Once again, her words triggered my anger at him for leaving her and betraying us both. Even though I was angry, I knew I should focus on Jenna and Emily. "He's a coward," I said, trying to keep my voice quiet. "Thank you so much," she said. When I realized my ex had betrayed us both, my anger erupted, but I focused on supporting Jenna in her time of need. "But we're not going to let him ruin our lives any further." Jenna nodded, relief and gratitude shining in her eyes. I knew that helping my sister and niece was a top priority, even though I was angry. "You are not alone," I said softly. "I'm here for you and Emily, every step of the way." Took Jenna's hand and promised to stay with her and support Emily during her final days. Jenna shook my hand, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you so much," she said in a voice that broke. "I don't know what I'd do without you." I reached for her hand, feeling determined. "Thank you so much," she sobbed, her shoulders shaking. "I was so scared, but I know Emily is safe now." Jenna wept with gratitude, knowing that she depended on me to support her, and that I would take care of Emily when she was gone. I hugged her gently, feeling the strength of her confidence. "We'll get through this together," I assured her. Her tears were gradually quelled and replaced by a tender but genuine smile. We had a clear path ahead of us, and I was ready to walk it with her. She called me and showed me her last drawing. Over the next few months, I lived with Jenna and Emily, getting to know my niece better and learning more about her bright and cheerful personality. Emily's smile filled the apartment and brought joy to even the darkest of days. Her innocence and strength were infectious, and I haven't smiled so much in years. Emily was a bright spot, and every day our connection grew. Many evenings we talked, and her voice was often full of sadness and thoughtfulness. While Jenna was sick, I helped her and learned about her regrets, her challenges as a single mom, and her choices. One night she confessed, eyes wide open, "I made so many mistakes. But Emily was the best thing that ever happened to me." I listened to her, offered comfort and understanding, and our conversations strengthened our bond and our mutual sense of respect. You and I have been through so much. Forgiveness and understanding developed between Jenna and I, which helped restore our broken relationship and heal old wounds as we approached the future. We shared stories, laughed and cried together to rebuild broken trust. "I'm so grateful for your presence," Jenna said one day, her voice filled with emotion. Our once broken connection was now more powerful than ever, and I felt a renewed sense of hope. Jenna's condition worsened. "It's in good hands." It brought Jenna peace in the last few days. I agreed to adopt Emily to ensure that she would have a stable and loving home after Jenna's death. "I know you'll take good care of her," Jenna said in a weak voice but full of confidence. I was determined to give Emily the love and security she deserved, even though the responsibility was daunting. On one of Jenna's last clear days, I held her in my arms as she comforted me. "I love you." Before she died, we had a brief moment of closure and peace. "Thank you so much for everything," she whispered with a faint but full gratitude. Tears ran down my face as I took her in my arms. "I love you too, Jenna," I replied, my heart breaking. In that moment, all the lamentations disappeared, leaving only love and understanding. As Jenna breathed her last breath, I knew she was finally at peace.